I appreciate everyone joining today. This is Mazebolt's webinar series. The topic for today is DDoS crisis, the hidden downtime threat, and why protections fail. Session today will be less about presentation. This is something that Matan and I have a lot of experience in, some of the things that we're seeing out there. So conversational, we may include things in the chat if there's material or something that you want to access, or feel free to reach out to us and we can send anything. But this is going to be very much conversational. We do want to get into the prevalence of DDoS, or how prevalent the threat is, why protection is failing, cover all those different types of topics, but more in that fashion. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will answer them at the end of this discussion. Feel free to reach out to either one of us on LinkedIn or follow up with an email, any different things like that. If we're unable to get to your question, then we'll make sure that we are replying afterwards. We'll send an answer to the question. Matan, let's start off with the reality of DDoS today and what's going on out there within DDoS. Kick us off.
Yeah, I think it's pretty noticeable. It's getting much more headlines now in the news. We see a massive increase in DDoS attacks being successful, taking down government websites in Europe and major banks and financial organizations. For a few hours, we had a case recently in the area where a payment credit card company went down. And can you imagine the impact of something like that? People all over the country were standing in lines, people leaving shops, online transactions not passing. So it was a massive disruption to citizens, not just businesses or stuff like that, for ordinary people.
And trying to buy gas to get home, can't do it.
Yeah. Definitely. I think for you in the US also, we see a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, in the US, certainly the impacts, and when we hear about them, banks are still the number one targeted. They make a vast majority of money being movement and stuff. Banks are a really good way to disrupt life, the impact that it has on life. But we don't hear about it a lot of times in the US until it's made enough of an impact on end users. When X got hit or when Microsoft 365 went down, there are certain notable DDoS attacks that get a lot of news and attention. But in large part, I think US is a little bit unique in the fact that it's not talked about as much as it should be. It's happening all the time. We're the number one targeted country. So we know it's happening, but it's just not as, people don't like to say they got hit.
Yeah, from what we see, we try to investigate. I personally went into the SEC filings since 2023. It was supposed to be reported. Every incident has to be reported, but I guess there's a rule where only tangible and monetary impact is going to be reported. And now companies, they play with that figure.
Very much, yes.
Unless they get caught, they would never come forth and tell everyone that, hey, I got hit.
Yeah, but it's the materiality aspect of the SEC filing or the rule. But there are other regulations and stuff out there that do get into, you got to go through and report, especially if you are an unavailability of service, especially if you're a big financial. There's other things, even state, so many different regulations out there. And you get into Europe and DORA and stuff. I think Europe's taken availability a lot more serious, and they're cracking down on it a bit more than the US is currently. Not that the US won't go that route.
We see DORA just started in January, and we see a lot of banks and other financial organizations now asking a lot of questions. How can we comply with DORA? It talks about risk assessment. It talks about third-party supply chain. It talks about periodical pen testing and all these different things. And I think mostly it's about risk reporting. What we see today is that the risk is higher, much higher than before for DDoS, thanks to all the unique new attacks that we see and also the different threat actors that we see today. I'll explain a little bit about the threat actors, especially in Europe. Obviously, you see a lot of Russian threat groups attacking different organizations within countries that are opposing Russia or trying to support Ukraine. Basically, in cyber warfare, DDoS is the weapon of choice because this is the one that has the most disruption. It's not about taking someone's ID and doing a phishing campaign. It's more about creating havoc, creating panic, creating an impact on citizens, not being able to access government services or things like even worst case scenario, transportation issues, power issues, utilities, these type of things.
Last year was the year of elections, not only in the US, but in a lot of different countries. Elections are heavily targeted. Bad actors just want to create chaos. And it's an easy way for them to do it. I will say that when you talk about there's all this evolution of things and stuff, enterprises are spending a significantly more amount of money that continues to increase year after year trying to stop it. The one estimate that I saw is between now and 2030 that the amount of spend is going to nearly double. By then, it's supposed to be 9 to 10 billion annually spent by enterprises trying to stop it. You don't get budget unless it's succeeding. It's interesting to see that this market is continuing to, people are still trying to figure out how to stop it.
Yeah, but the budget obviously is not everything.
Agreed.
What we see is that the companies that are getting hit are not the ones with the low budgets. These are the biggest companies. You mentioned X, and we're talking about government and banks. These type of organizations, they spend already hundreds of thousands on DDoS, if not millions, on resilience and contingency plans and having SOC teams and everything. They spend so much money. Eventually, at the end of the day, when Russia or other threat actors, even cyber mafia companies that are doing this as a service, even they're able to take down those big companies. Something is definitely not working well. There's a lot of new attack vectors, a lot of different types of unique ways to attack. We see, obviously, an increase in layer 7 attacks. That's much more sophisticated than before. We see AI that is being now utilized to try and find these weak spots and understanding the different attack surface for each company. So there's definitely that. What do you see on your side?
I'll mention the AI thing, then I'll talk about one aspect that I'm seeing on my side is that I think a lot of times we think about how AI can help us, but we don't tend to factor in just how much it's helping the people that are trying to attack us too. So it has made a notable impact in what attackers are capable of doing. But the one thing that stood out for me recently that is on the rise, I was at App World earlier this year. I was at FSISAC conference. I know you're coming to RSA next week, but the one thing that I was hearing as a repeated type thing is that companies are struggling with how do you do DDoS protections on APIs. APIs is a huge portion of internet traffic these days, so it is continuing to grow as a target, and bad actors like big targets. APIs is now focus point for some of these attacks, and getting to see that as increasing more and more. I think that an enterprise is going to have to say, all right, I'm used to protecting my web page. I also need to make sure that I'm protecting APIs.
Yeah, definitely. I think the attack surface is only growing. It used to be very simple. You have one data center, you put a big box at the beginning, and that's it. Today, services are all across different data centers. Some of them are in the cloud, some of them are by third party. The attack surface is so vast that the entry points for attackers and the way they can utilize the different weaknesses in the configurations, which leads us basically to why all of this is happening.
That's a good topic. Let's get to why. Yeah, obviously it happens. Let's get into why. Go ahead. I will let you kick that off.
Out of the box, DDoS mitigation solutions, they come with predefined policies. They come with global policies that are not as restrictive as they should be. The reason for that is obviously not to get false positives when you install these solutions. You don't want customers to get impacted and legitimate traffic being blocked. So these policies, they're not that restrictive. And what happens a lot of the times is that there's misconfigurations that are just built into these policies, not because there are like bad code or anything. It's just because different customers have different requirements, different services have different limits, different thresholds. And all of these things should be configured in these solutions, and they're not. The reason they're not is because when they are installed in the first place, there's no real way to tweak these devices, to tweak these solutions, because you have to test these. And the only way to test a DDoS mitigation solution is by launching a DDoS attack, and spending all this time doing that during the installation period is going to be impactful for the company that you install this on. There's a problem here. So you have to kind of rely on the DDoS mitigation solutions and vendors that they will do their job. And what we see, in fact, is that companies still get attacked. They still get successfully taken down, even though they are completely covered from CDN to WAF to a scrubbing center. Even they have an on-prem device, they still go down. It's all about these misconfigurations.
It is those Misconfigurations, we categorize them as a vulnerability. It's not a CVE-based vulnerability, but a misconfiguration is a vulnerability in protections. I think that the way to cover that gap in the past has been that, let's do SLAs. We're going to have the best SLA out there. We can engage in 15 minutes or whatever, but somebody's already down at that point, either down or significantly impacted customer traffic before an SLA kicks in and somebody in a SOC team engages and then reconfigures in order to stop that DDoS attack, to fixing it on the fly versus being proactive and doing it early.
At the end of the day, it's not going to prevent the next attack. It's only a reactive approach.
It's only going to stop that one attack vector, maybe next time.
Exactly. Usually these hackers are like a one-trick pony. They're going to use the same attack on a different target and they might get the same result and the company might be taken down. Yeah. So we really have to be in a paradigm shift. We need to switch from being reactive to being proactive. In DDoS, it's hard because, as we just mentioned, when you test your DDoS solutions, you are at the risk of taking down the service that you're trying to test.
The very thing you're trying to protect.
Exactly. That's how we at Mazeball, that's how we started. We were a red team company and we were doing these DDoS tests and they're not effective at preventing the next attack, as we just said. It's only to cover a fraction of the attack surface. Obviously, it doesn't cover all the different types of attacks and it doesn't really make an impact on the next attacks because it's not going to block anything. It's never been tested necessarily, so we don't know what's going to happen. And these companies, when they install these devices, a lot of the times, they just need to wait and see if an attack comes. So that's how we started. And go ahead.
I was going to say, that's how we started. And I think one of the things that as I'm talking to enterprises and talking to customers about that manual red team type thing, one of the things that you can really accomplish with that is how do your people respond to an actual DDoS attack? But it's more of a test of human responses or your playbook and isn't necessarily giving you a lot of data into those vulnerabilities. You may see, great, my team can respond well, but you're covering a very small amount of vulnerabilities. So it's not that it's a bad thing to do and see how your team reacts, but it's not going to give you legitimate resource to say, where am I vulnerable?
At Mazebolt, that's where we started. And what we came up with is a new type of method to go and become proactive in the DDoS space. Basically, our solution is called Radar. And what it gives is a real effective way to prevent the next DDoS attacks because it provides you a complete coverage of the entire attack surface against all the different DDoS attacks. It's done continuously throughout the year. You don't have to wait for a maintenance window. It's done automatically. And the most important part, it's done non-disruptively. And that's the only way you can really test your entire attack surface. And with that, once you uncover the vulnerabilities, that's already the major part because now you can go to these vendors, you can go to your dashboard where you have control. And you can make those fixes and you can make those tweaks in the configuration and customize them to your requirements, to your needs, and make sure that your service stays up for real and it doesn't go down the next attack just because of the misconfiguration.
To really drive home the non-disruptive side of it. I know there are some people that will always say, I'm going to run a test in a lab environment or something like that. That's never going to give you reality of what a production system and those type things are. And non-disruptive, I drive that home by saying, we are non-disruptive to the point that you can run our simulations 2:00 in the afternoon on your production environment and not worry about actually affecting your customers. And we've seen it over and over again. I think that when we come into an environment, people have to see it to believe it. But once you're possible to do that, then that opens up the automation. So now you can run for hours and hours.
You mentioned that. I think that it's important to really understand live traffic, live production environments, because you never know which component inside the network is the one that is going to be at fault at that specific moment. It might be that the service will go down. That's the most common thing, but we also see a lot of the times the firewalls or other components on the way, they're the ones that are having the trouble. And if you don't test the real environment, you won't get the real results. With Mazebolt Radar, what you get is real results, no false positives. Everything is accurate and it's real DDoS attacks that are being simulated. And when it's done non-destructively, as you said, you can freely do whatever needs to be done and test everything and even strategize where you test first. You have more risk, obviously, in certain areas than others. But the most important thing is that you test, you're able to test. You finally have something that you can use in your toolbox. When you implement these DDoS mitigation solutions, you have something that you can tweak everything from the thin one to the WAF, to the scrubbing center. You can talk to your telco and tell them what you found. You can talk to your cloud vendor and tell them what you found. In some scenarios, you can talk to your local partner. He has the controls and he can make the configuration changes. So obviously, you talk to them or they talk to you, but now you have a tool that will provide you the visibility and the recommendations that you need in order to fix your environment.
So one of the things that I always do for math to try to let people understand just how the scale of this is, if you have 100 exposed targets or assets, and we have over 150 attack vectors that we can run, that combination of possibilities that somebody can attack you, that's 15,000 different ways. I put this into about a decade ago, regular vulnerability, CE-based vulnerability management crossed a line and you just couldn't do a manual test every once in a while. You couldn't do it like once a month. You couldn't do those basic scans. It had to be continuous, always running, looking for CVE-based vulnerabilities. The amount of attack vectors, the size of public-facing attack surfaces and stuff like that. Now, we've really reached a point that it cannot happen anymore through manual. Finding vulnerabilities in DDoS is going to have to be an automated progression. We'll go through and maybe reiterate what we're saying is necessary. Then we'll look into Q&A, see what kind of questions we have. So taking from this conversation, we have to reach a point that we can be proactive. That sitting around waiting on somebody to attack us and figuring out the vulnerability then is not going to happen. We have to do it across an entire attack surface because a single target that you haven't tested or haven't thought about has the ability to take down everything. And that it needs to be something that's automated, that can run at scale to cover that 15,000 type scenario. Is there anything else you'd say that critical, we're going to fix this problem moving forward?
I actually want to connect to what you just said. You mentioned the fact that there's, let's say in that scenario that you mentioned, there's 15,000 combinations, right? With that amount of combinations, we see the rise of DDoS attacks being used by many countries today and many cyber mafias. So altogether, what we see in the future, what we project is that there's going to be more and more trouble. And we have a tool that we developed because we do so many simulations. There's a tool that we've developed that is based on AI and based on all the simulations that we've done throughout time. It will allow you to test your environment. It's a predictive tool, but it will give you some insights regarding potential risk you might have. I suggest all of our partners and customers run it and make sure that you're safe. If not, you can always talk to us or your local partner and see what we can do.
I know that just got put into chat. So I want to make sure that everybody's aware that this is not something that's going to run a simulation against you. This is something that, based on the millions of data points that we have, can provide you with the likelihood. It'll give you some likely attack vectors that you are vulnerable to based on information that you put in and some information. It's well worth people doing, because if you can find those type things and shut them down, it's something that we're doing for free. Let me look at our Q&A, see what we have. One of the questions is about overprotection. Can DDoS mitigations be overprotecting, meaning that it's put in and now it's blocking legitimate traffic? I know you mentioned something earlier. The default tries to do that the least amount of time. It's a good question. I'll let you, what's your take on it? And then I'll provide mine as well.
The opposite can be as well, right? A misconfiguration can be on the other side, that it will block legitimate traffic for some customers. And that should be easier to detect. But sometimes, unless the customer complains about his services, as the service provider, you might not know. That's one of the problems.
I've seen firsthand where some mitigations are overprotective. And it comes across as, hey, there's oddity things going on in the network. I mean, it just creates a lot of headache trying to find it. But a more obvious one for me, I think, is, it used to be a very common thing, and it still is a very common thing to do, that people will turn on geo-blocking. From my standpoint, geo-blocking is an overly aggressive protection because it's not very effective. If you say, I'm only going to allow targets that are, or I'm only going to allow IPs from within the United States to reach me, there's still millions of bots in the US that are
Yeah.
part of these botnets. So an attacker can go through and say, I'm only going to attack you from systems of bots that I have within your own country. Geo-blocking is just one of those things that, yes, it's overprotective in some aspect, but it's not as effective as it used to be.
I want to add on that. It might be as a step in your playbook during an attack or something like that. That might make sense. But if you're using GeoBlock as a strategy, as an always on kind of feature, it means you're at risk. You know you're at risk. You're afraid. You don't know how to fix it. So you're geo-blocking. So it's not a real strategy.
There are things that happen sometimes that I call it a wartime decision. You're under attack right now, and there may be things that you do during wartime that shouldn't be how you run day to day going forward. A lot of decisions from DDoS are made during that wartime.
You mentioned botnets, and I want to mention that. I want to talk about that. We're seeing two types of various botnets now that are being developed. So obviously one is embedded within devices that are being produced today in all these different places in China, in Japan, in Korea. Some of them out of the box, they come already with a botnet that is ready, that is deployed already by consumers. They have IPs, they have everything set up out of the box, really. We've seen some reports on devices manufactured like that, but the same thing that we see today, there's a lot of malware infecting IoT devices, and that malware is just growing and adding more and more devices to it, making it much stronger. And we see huge DDoS attacks being launched recently, record-breaking after record-breaking attacks. And it just makes me feel like we haven't seen the least of what's going to happen.
Oh, no, it's going to continue to get worse. But you're right. There was a news story like several months ago about a company that was proactively paid by a bad actor group to pre-install their malware so that they didn't have to breach these systems anymore and install it in the background. They literally just paid the company that was making the equipment to pre-install it. It's amazing that happens, but it happens. We've got 2 minutes. I may throw out one more question here. How often should people test? I know we talk about what it was from a red team standpoint. Realistically, how often should it be?
It's not something that you test once and you're finished. Environments are dynamic. There's new services that are being added to the environment all the time. There are changes that are being done to policies, sometimes by the cloud vendors, sometimes by the ISP. These things, they change. If you don't test, it might be that they introduced a new vulnerability to your specific traffic blend, to your specific services. The answer should be always, as much as possible, at least.
I agree with that. Continuous, you're starting to see that more and more with Gartner's CTEM recommendations. You see it more and more in regulations that the continuous aspect is becoming the answer to not just DDoS testing, but a lot of other things. It's just the world doesn't work. Let's do something once a month or once a quarter or once a year. That's just not a reality today. Continuous is becoming the answer to that question on every topic security-wise.
Maybe it's not the best analogy, but I feel like a DDoS might be like a heart attack. And if you had a smartwatch where you would be able to track your heart rate and get an alert before a heart attack, maybe it exists even today, but I think that's a better approach than waiting for the heart attack and then go to it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We are at the end of the scheduled time here. Any questions that are in the Q&A that we did not get to, we will certainly make sure that we are responding to that. But I do appreciate everyone's time today. Hopefully the conversation was informative. And like I said, feel free to reach out to either one of us if you want to dive deeper into any of it or just have any questions that you would like to ask us. So thanks again for joining, everybody.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.